So, John, I was complimenting your jacket, and I thought that you arrived dressed up for me, but then you shot me down in flames and said that you joined a committee earlier.
I'd literally, well, I'd actually been to a committee in person. Those things happen again these days, so
Yeah.
I've been there. But not many people compliment me on this jacket, so I'll take what I can get.
Well, thank you for joining me, John. Appreciate you coming to have a conversation with me. The University of Cambridge. So there's probably a few people, probably quite young, that have never heard of the University of Cambridge. But for the majority of people, there's a little known institution in England that provides world-class education. So the University of Cambridge. Did you want to give us like an introduction to the organisation?
Sure. So I think you're right, Matt. Most people have heard of the university. It does have a global brand and a global awareness. It's an 814-year-old organisation. It's one of two very well-known universities in the UK, and it's a top 5 global university. And it's top 5 because of its teaching of undergraduates, but also probably more significantly for its involvement in research and its involvement in world-class research.
And in terms of numbers, what are we talking in terms of students, of staff, and of like campus locations, for example?
Excellent question, and an ongoing internal debate. How many people are there in this organisation?
Right.
So there's about 12,500 staff, and then there's a head count of approximately 55,000 people if you add up undergrads, postgrads, postdocs, researchers of some description. And then it becomes this ever increasingly vague user groups that are affiliated somehow to the organisation. Okay. So it's pretty big. And then in terms of a university campus, the city is the campus. So it has buildings that extend about 10 kilometres from one end to the other. Half of the city is effectively university or collegiate university land. Okay. So it's a big organisation. The university aside has something in the region of 350 buildings, and then the colleges have a lot more buildings in addition to that.
Okay. And so even though you are an 800 or so, I think you said, year-old organisation, you to be at the top 5 in the world, there's probably a lot of innovation and transformation and things like that go on. So what's the general direction of travel at the moment for the university? What's going on?
So I think you're right. The aspiration is to stay in the top 5. In fact, I think that's the university's stated goal, to stay in the top 5 of all global university ranking lists. And that's going to require a constant degree of innovation or reinventing yourself or trying to stay at the forefront of development. That's a challenge in an 800-year-old organisation, because it tends to bring a lot of organisational history with it, or culture, or behaviour sets. So that is, that's one of the challenges of working at the university. You're trying to constantly innovate a building that's carrying a lot of past with it. And a lot of that is excellent. It's part of what makes Cambridge a unique and wonderful place. The pandemic was a fantastic experience, not for a lot of people, in terms of the university's ability to engage with change, because typically there's maybe a slower cadence to change within. I think it's probably fair to say within the HE sector, but certainly with some of the older universities. And instantly that kind of dissipated. It showed a capability to really get to grips with modern technology and modern ways of working in a quite surprisingly quick manner. And that was really refreshing. And now the pandemic's passed, there's a tendency to maybe revert to former behaviours.
Everything takes ages again now.
Yeah. Hopefully it's better than it was. So the challenges around, well, what's going on at the university. There's always lots of stuff going on, arguably too much stuff going on. But from an IT perspective, there's a big digital transformation piece, and that unpacks into multiple kind of different work streams and projects and programs. But it's about trying to bring the organization into a very modern digital age.
Okay. And can you give us any examples about, what that actually means? Because if you walk down the street, you're probably going to hear digital transformation at some point, but it probably, means loads of different things to loads of different people. So what does that mean to the University of Cambridge, and how has it manifested itself into actual, output?
So I think it's spot on. I think it becomes an umbrella term for everybody to kind of park their particular pet project under, and that's that's not necessarily a bad thing. Certainly within my role, we're doing a large piece that we've framed as defragmentation. So there's 150 departments at the university. A lot of them are running their own IT infrastructure, edge infrastructure, typically. We're going through a process of looking at the infrastructure that is commodity or utility, and we're defragmenting it. So we're kind of taking it from the edge more into the center, and that's with the view of making the physical estate more flexible, more responsible, more agile. So in that would be agile working, hybrid working. So
yeah,
we're seeing a removal of desktops, a replacement with laptops. We're seeing large-scale adoption of cloud and cloud-based services. Whether that be kind of SharePoint or SaaS or Google Cloud or Azure or AWS, whatever it might be. So this is about trying to reposition the organization in a place where it can be much more flexible and responsive to whatever comes next.
Okay. And the drivers of that, we mentioned about COVID and, basically give a boot up the backside to get everything going. But, I'm guessing there was probably some rumors and projects going on prior to that. So what do you think you see the main benefits being of that consolidation and that defragmentation?
So this is one of the challenges of the organization I work in, is that there are lots of benefits to be had across the board. So you could point to making a more flexible physical estate, right? That would be a demonstrable thing. It would allow you to have an estate strategy which is predicated on where the usage is and the consumption and the behaviours of people. You could point to a cybersecurity piece around this, where you're about putting some assurance around governance and controls around your estate. You could look at the environmental impact of moving servers out from the edge, consolidating them into a infrastructure as a service, virtual cloud, something of that nature. So there are lots of benefits, and it depends who you're talking to as to the benefit of what you're trying to play into. And it doesn't. That makes me sound cynical, and it's not intended to be. They're not competing benefits; they're complementary benefits. But you've got to be clear about what benefit you're articulating to what use group.
Okay. And I want to pick up on that piece a little bit later, when we talk more in depth about your role and some of the challenges. But let's kind of transition away from what's going on at the university, and we've discussed that centralizing and defragmentation, digital transformation. That's a big work stream and takes up a lot of your time right now. But how do you, as a head of infrastructure, what role do you play in that? Are you setting the strategy? Are you, on the floor doing the configurations of AWS or whatever you might be? Talk to us a little bit about how a head of infrastructure's day or week may look as you're going through a digital transformation.
So I smiled at the idea of me clicking buttons and setting up an AWS space. The people that work for me have rightly taken away my permissions to do anything of any serious nature some time ago, and that is the correct thing for them to be doing. Okay. I did do IT at some point in my past, but I think those days have come and gone.
Okay.
So there's about 100 people in the team, and a lot of it is around. So there's the, do I do hands-on operational stuff? No, not really. I did a little bit actually during the pandemic, but there is a temptation with everybody who was technical who's gone into management to revert to technical because it's it's their comfort zone, it's the thing they got into IT for, it's their safe space. But no, I don't tend to do that. Principally it's about managing a group of people, so it's more kind of generic management skills, I would say. I would say I influence the strategy of the organization in terms of the digital infrastructure and the digital transformation, but it's very much about trying to marry the strategy with the actual implementation, and it's trying to convert one into another in a meaningful time frame and scale and cadence, whatever that might be.
So it's interesting that you say that, because often when I have conversations like this, and I've said it before, that when you speak to someone from in technology, you often think that they're just going to talk about technology and that's what their day job is. But more and more, what I've found is that when you conversing with senior executives of technology teams, it really is more of a management role. Generic management and instilling culture and values, setting strategy, managing projects, that seems to take up a larger proportion of the job than actual, what I would call technology and, tech kind of things. Would you agree?
So yes, I think that's largely correct. And I think that's an inevitable product of the role I'm in, insofar as, as we alluded to earlier, I've come out of a committee earlier, which is pro-vice chancellors and bursars and heads of school. So you're having a different conversation, which is, it's obviously an IT orientated committee, but you're discussing organizational outcomes, not technology per se, right?
Yeah.
So you end up adopting this other language and capability of translating rather than talking technology. But it's still important to have a broad understanding of what's going on in the technology, because you then have to communicate with the team that are doing it, and also it should still be interesting, right? I mean, part of the reason people got into IT is because at some point they were enthused by technology, and there is still the capacity to be wowed, excited by technology. At least there should be.
So from what I've heard, and I agree with you, it's a you're running a business and you're contributing to running an organization. Yes, you're doing that with coming through the vase of technology and how technology can underpin what the organization is doing. So let's talk a little bit more about your role then, and I mean this broadly in terms of head of infrastructure, not the head of infrastructure at Cambridge University. So, when we were speaking previously, I joked that I don't mind if, there's someone that in the organization that ticks you off. That's not what I'm talking about here. But, generally, what would you say are the things which make your life difficult as a head of infrastructure? And, that can be resources, a lack of knowledge, or, anything like that.
So I would say the challenge that I face at the moment is we have too many concurrent things going on at the same time. So the amount of priority projects, I mean, that's a contradiction in terms anyway, but the amount of important projects or programs running concurrently is beyond our ability to manage all of them as well as we should be. So that is an ongoing challenge, and that's a good challenge, I guess, because it shows an organizational appetite to move faster and that's a positive thing. I think it's also a reflection of working within a very large, fragmented organisation or devolved organisation, should I say, where there are a number of different customers and stakeholders, not always with aligned desires. So you're dealing with a lot of competing requirements simultaneously. Okay. So that ends up being a challenge. I think broadly, if you were to to step back and just talk about the role of head of infrastructure, it's and I've been very aware that this was a certainly a COVID challenge. It's making sure you're aware where the market is, because it constantly is moving and evolving. And if you're too insular, if you're too inward looking at your own organisation for too long, you miss where the market's moved on, and it's moving quickly at the moment. So having just even a good understanding of where the market is, where your peers are, where the sector is something you need to dedicate a reasonable amount of time to.
And do you find value then in attending, things like higher education, networking groups, I don't know, anything where you can stay in contact and, keep your finger on the pulse of the market? Is that something that you actively dedicate time to?
So I've been to 3 of these in the last 3 weeks, which is unusually high number as it happens. Yeah. But yes, it is something where I need to commit time. I would push back on the nature that it has to be, and I know I've mentioned it in this call, it has to be higher education. I want to know where the market is. So, for instance, if we're looking at software-defined networking of some description,
yeah,
then our requirements aren't going to look a million miles different to that of Sainsbury's or AstraZeneca or any large organisation with multiple buildings across a large space, right? So I don't necessarily want to see what another university does, because it's interesting to see what your peers are doing, but there's a world outside academia, and it's important that you stay connected to that. I think that is one of the challenges we have, is because invariably you get invited to vendor organisations which are shaped around the vertical you're in. So you end up being in a slightly larger echo chamber than your own organisation.
And particularly with things like SD-WAN, that's kind of a vertical agnostic, because the benefits of SD-WAN usually come from having large locations and a disparate organisation. And it's not just universities that have that. It's, like, as you mentioned, an absolute,
there are scores of organisations that would benefit from the correct. So that is, and infrastructure is typically playing in the space where this technology is becoming matured. Typically, it's been around for a while now. That the sector is starting to calcify around a few players. Even if the technology evolves, there's typically a limited amount of players, and it's making sure that you're aware of where they're up to, and what other organisations are doing with this.
So let's then dive a little bit deeper onto this topic of staying abreast with the market. And how I like to usually position this question is that you, of course, as head of infrastructure, have a mandate, and it's part of the remit of your role to bring in new technologies to the organization, as we've discussed, staying abreast of the market. The flip side to that is that vendors and those IT people that make those IT solutions, they're trying to do the same, but in reverse. They're trying to make sure that all of the heads of infrastructure are aware of their technology, and if they feel that it's useful, can avail of that technology. And there's sometimes that can come to loggerheads in the ways that happens. So your experiences of working with vendors or of interacting with vendors, would you say that that's a positive experience and a part of your job that you enjoy, or not?
So, well, it's obviously both, isn't it? Is the answer. So I think that there are some sections within the HE industry that see vendors as an unnecessary evil to be negotiated with. And I genuinely don't think that's the case. You know, you should be looking for strategic partners as an organisation, and then, you know, leaning on them quite heavily to help you deliver some sort of outcome. And to that extent, we do have some very good partners in engagement, both with manufacturer and vendor or supplier, whatever you want to frame it. They typically take quite a while to establish good working relationships and require quite a bit of effort on both sides. But invariably, if you get it right, are pretty beneficial actually to the organisation. And we can unpack that a little bit more. The challenge is getting into the space where you don't have any incumbent or agreed engagement or suppliers of any description. So you're going to new events, you're engaging with a plethora of different account managers from different suppliers, and it's difficult because you're inviting yourself to an awful lot of unsolicited communication at that point.
Right.
And it's invariably, you know what people are doing, right? It's well intentioned. They're doing their job.
Yeah.
But my capacity to take on new stuff is finite. As we mentioned, we've already got too much stuff going on. Being overwhelmed doesn't help at this point. So it's just managing that.
And so, you know, I guess you have your core partners, and they will, you know, most likely run the core of your infrastructure, or at least provide the core underpinning of your infrastructure. But as you mentioned, you have to stay abreast of the market and of potential new technologies, large or small, that may come into the market. Do you know, how do you decide what is something that you want to investigate further? So, you know, I'm assuming that if you're like everyone else that I speak to, you probably have 50 or 60 unsolicited emails either a day or every couple of days. How do you filter through that and decide which is worth your time and which is not?
So the emails is invariably a tough route as a cold call anyway, because, you know, outside of the unsolicited emails, inboxes are filling up with all sorts of actual work kind of emails as well, which are equally trying as hard to manage in some particular way. Typically, I've found so organisations like universities tend to go through a procurement exercise if it wants to buy a new product, and it'll go through an RFI or RFP, something of that nature. And that's fine, although that's typically, as an IT person, not where you start off in the tender, because you want to understand the market and you want to understand the questions you need to go ask. Vendor shows are better for that, but then that's typically the customer, me deciding what is the technology stack that I'm particularly interested in, what is the pain point I'm trying to resolve at the moment, and then trying to limit that to a subset of solutions that might meet my needs. The emails. So to give you an example, looking at a particular technology stack recently, which is around the IAM space, kind of IGA, IAM. I went to a small conference a few weeks ago, and you end up getting, you know, 15 emails off the back of it. And, you know, these are all people you spoke to. Yeah. I can't dedicate 15 hours a week to having conversations with people about products we might buy. So it's about narrowing that down. How do we do that?
And are you doing that using things like Gartner, or are you using an internal committee again? You know, maybe you'll sit with the networking team and you'll say, right, this is what we took from that show. You know, we've established that we need XYZ. That XYZ thing was interesting. Now let's go and do our own review of the market. So, you know, is that kind of the things that happen?
So a bit of both. So we certainly engage with Gartner, and we'll work through that. But I do very much like the second option as well, of taking a number of staff. So IT staff don't always tend to be the most enthusiastic about getting out and meeting new people. You know, they've got a lot of work to get on in their day job. So, you know, you have to take them down to a conference or something and introduce. And then it's important that they're engaged with this, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be actually using this product and implementing it and making sure it gets over the line. So there's no point in me unilaterally deciding the tools for them to use. This is about helping them navigate that process. I'll get more closely involved with this supplier vendor when it gets down to a smaller number. And then we can start having some discussions about what a relationship might look like with the organization.
So to me, you know, just to kind of paraphrase what we've been speaking about for the last 5 or so minutes, what it sounds like is you definitely have an appetite to engage with vendors, and you see the value of engaging with vendors. But typically that comes later on in the process. And a cold email is not the light bulb moment that makes you think about a technology or a vendor. It's an amalgamation of trade shows, of events, staying up to date with the market, internal conversations, which all come together in this melting pot and help you develop that roadmap. And then as you proceed to execute that roadmap, that's when you start to bring in vendors to drill down.
Correct. I think that's a pretty good summarization. Okay. And then when we get it down to a smaller number of, or at least we understand what the market looks like, we would then go through a formal kind of tender process.
And the last question that I'm going to ask on this, John, is because we're going to run out of time in about 6 or 7 minutes. You know, when you get onto one of those conversations with a vendor and you agree to take a call, what kinds of thing do you actually find useful? Because typically, you know, a vendor will give like a brand presentation where they spend 20 or 30 minutes talking about, you know, the history, etc., and then maybe half an hour at the end talking about the technology. What kinds of things, when you get onto that call, do you actually, you know, find really juicy and help you?
So the brand history and alike, I'm probably not on the call if I haven't done a little bit of reading around the company anyway. Yeah. So, and that is the information I can get elsewhere. So that's not what I'm after. It depends how well I understand the market already. If it's something that we're fairly new to, I want somebody to give me a very brief appraisal about this is what we think is important in the market. This is what we're seeing. This is where the value seems to be most beneficial, you know, and that is information candidly I can take and run past other contenders. What do you think is the most important? Invariably, indications of price, and accepting that that's not the same as, you know, the end price you get through a tender process, whatever that might look like. But you have to understand what the pricing model would look like. You'd have to understand. You also have to have an understanding. We're an unusually shaped organisation. You know, it helps if the supplier listens to the challenges we have and how we're trying to address it. You know, and part of it is I think one of the biggest challenges I get is suppliers who are very keen to get the business tend to say, yes, we can do it, which I understand why they're doing that, and I'm sure they can do it. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what we should do. So organizations like ours tend to have very embedded processes or ways of working. And I would prefer a supplier with a little bit more confidence going, I understand this is what you do. You might want to think about how you approach that, because we're finding most people adopt it this way, or you might want to think about your approach. So that requires a slightly more confident, mature conversation.
So the things I took from that were that you appreciate when a vendor can, as you say, have a mature conversation with you and work with you rather than trying to push a particular way of working or doing something onto you. Okay, that's really interesting. John, that's been an amazingly insightful conversation that we've had. And I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for joining me. What I'd want to do with the last couple of minutes is if there's any like particular roles, or if there's any particular things that you're looking for right now, let us know how, or let people know how to get in conversation with you, or this is your 2 minutes to run a pitch on why working under you would be an amazing feat.
Working with me is what I want people to work with me. Okay. I think so. There's a lot of, invariably, everywhere people work, there's loads of challenges, right? And there's lots of things that we find hard work, or is the thing that we don't enjoy. I work with some fabulous people. I genuinely work with. I have a team of people that are incredibly capable, incredibly diligent, very smart, very bright, very hardworking. I actually have fun with the people I work with. I think not many people can say that. So I am fortunate that I work with good people. So we always have roles available. We're always open to engagement. Yeah, it's a fun place to work.
Wicked. Well, I'm going to tidy up my resume, my CV this evening, and I'll send.
There'll always be a place for you, Matt.
Thank you very much, my friend, and thank you for joining. Appreciate it, John.
No problem. Thank you. Cheers, Matt.